What if I told you that the most talented wide receiver in all of football has also been the worst one to build your fantasy roster around through the first 2 weeks of 2023? How do I know that? Because the most talented wide receiver in fantasy football has the worst FGW.
Yeah, feeling good on a Wednesday.
Hope you're doing pretty good for a Wednesday. I'm Byron Cobalt from byron-cobalt.com. FGW is Fantasy Games 1. It's a metric that I developed that do a better job than points at quantifying impacts that players have on your fantasy football team. What we're going to do today is we're going to recap week 2 and use Fantasy Games 1 as a metric to help us do that, to help us make sense of all of this, because that was another pretty crazy week here. There have been a lot of players that are supposed to do well and not really doing too well, including the topic of today's discussion.
Now, we're talking business. Let's talk business.
Yeah, let's talk business, mate.
I made a claim here. I made the claim that the most talented wide receiver in football has been the worst fantasy asset through week 2 of 2023. A lot of you are probably wondering, who do I think is the most talented wide receiver in fantasy football? And how can I justify that? Doesn't that seem like somewhat of a qualitative claim? Well, yeah, it somewhat is. I think I have a pretty convincing case for why Jamar Chase is the most talented wide receiver in fantasy. And once we've established that, we'll get into why he's been just the worst player to have on your fantasy team so far this year. So first, how do you quantify talent? It's a difficult thing to do. When people talk about talent, they mean different things. You could talk about athletic talent. You could talk about football skill as a raw talent. You could talk about things that aren't really coachable. A lot of people think of that as talent. You think about talent as potential. The best I can do at boiling talent down into things that we could actually have a debate about, 3 main factors. First factor, talent as evaluated by NFL scouts. What pick the player was drafted in. If the player is drafted high, there's a good chance it's because of talent, especially if they were not particularly productive in college. Or the second way to quantify what we all kind of understand to be talent is by looking at athletic measurables. And the third way is the wow factor. This would be, say, a player's ability to make an incredible catch. There isn't a combine drill to show how well a player can do an Odell Beckham style catch. If there were one, George Pickens would have been a high draft pick. A lot of these factors I'm not going to be able to make a strong argument for because they're kind of opinion based. Which catch is better than another? Which combine drills do a good job at approximating wide receiver talent? It comes down to where a player was drafted, having adjusted a little bit for college stats. So if you look up on screen, I have a list here of all the wide receivers that have been drafted in the top 20 since 2018 in the NFL draft. There were no wide receivers drafted in the top 20 in 2018 and 2019. First off, you can see that Jamar Chase was the highest drafted receiver. And if you take quarterbacks out of the equation, he was the second non-quarterback drafted in his year. I don't think you can call an older receiver necessarily the most talented in the league unless they are currently performing at a level way above anyone else's potential. So this would go for, say, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. Cooper Kupp isn't older, but he's seen some wear and tear. Say Stephon Diggs is there. Here's the reason why. As a player gets older, their ability to fulfill their talent eventually goes away. Either it becomes clear that they're not as talented as we thought, or age begins to make it impossible for them to reach their overall potential. Here's the thing. If you're going to argue that, say, Devontae Adams were the most talented wide receiver in the NFL, you might be able to make that argument, but then I could go back and say the most talented wide receiver alive is Randy Moss, which might be true, and he's just really hampered by age, but that's not really what we refer to as talent. So if a player is older, his wide receiver skills are off the charts. That's not necessarily the same as being talented. So I don't consider Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, or those other players to be really in contention for the most talented wide receiver. Arguably the best receiver in the NFL, Justin Jefferson. How is Jamar Chase clearly more talented than Justin Jefferson? The draft pick gap between the two is just too big. Justin Jefferson was taken in the early 20s, just after Jalen Reagor, strangely enough. Justin Jefferson may be a better receiver than Jamar Chase. I don't think he's more talented. Player who has a claim for the crown of most talented wide receiver in the NFL, besides Jamar Chase, purely by draft capital, is probably Jalen Waddle. Player taken 1 pick after Jamar Chase. To be fair, there's also a strong argument there because Jalen Waddle was taken with the 6th pick, even after getting hurt his last year in college. Jamar Chase took a year off. He wasn't hurt. So neither player is really dependent on production going into the draft. But here's where I think the edge is. Jalen Waddle, by being such a speed demon like Tyreek Hill, a lot of his value comes from the fact that defenses have to actually play differently to account for how we can blow the top off a defense. The fact that Jamar Chase doesn't do that means that his value is coming from something that's more directly going to lead to his production. Catching, route running, separation, ability to get the ball in traffic. durability, explosiveness, things like that. Where Jalen Waddle's pure speed, even if he might be less talented, he's going to be more valuable to NFL teams just because speed is such a premium, especially speed like his. So that's my argument for Ja'Marr Chase being the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. If you disagree, feel free to let me know in a comment. I'm happy to have a discussion around this. I know this isn't something that you can make a definitive statement on. I'm pretty confident about this claim that Ja'Marr Chase is the most talented receiver, though. Now, to the second half of my claim that the most talented wide receiver has been the worst fantasy asset so far this year. You're going to have to stay tuned for that because he's at the bottom of a key list. It's time to start recapping week 2. Has anybody seen week 2? Anybody try giving him a call? Is he shacked up somewhere?
That's a Sicilian message. It means
week 2.
He sleeps with the fishes.
What is Fantasy Games 1? What are you looking at when you see a decimal number there? Well, a Fantasy Games 1 number of 0.40 means that a player is increasing your chance of winning in a given week by 0.4 of a win, by about 40%. So you're going from 50-50, so 50% chance, up to 90% chance. That's what 0.4 represents. And it considers not only what the player scored, it considers what your opponents in fantasy football are likely to score, and it also considers how likely you are to start the play. If you start a player 0% of the time, he is not going to have a direct impact on your winning of fantasy games. There may be an indirect impact if we're talking about a first-round pick that you can't get into your starting lineup because he's injured. More details on that in the link that I got up there. So check that out if you want to know how this is all done. Well, who won the week? Top of the list for Fantasy Games 1 for week 2. We have Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen enthusiasts such as myself have been waiting for a great Keenan Allen season, at least since the Keenan and Kel show was canceled. Well, Keenan Allen has stuck around for a long time, and much longer than Kel, at least. Early in his career, he did have some promise of huge seasons in 2015 when he got hurt in week 8, and in 2016, where he tore his ACL halfway through the second quarter of week 1. He already had 6 catches for 63 yards by that point in the game. He was clearly on track to break all the records, and then he gets knocked out for the year. Why? So it's nice to see Keenan Allen with a big game here leading the week. TJ Hawkinson with a great game here. In week 1, we had the semi-annual Brandon Ayuk good game. This week, we have the semi-annual TJ Hawkinson good game. And I'm looking forward to the semi-annual George Kittle good game. Hopefully next week. We'll see. Saquon Barkley had a great game up until spraining his ankle. We'll see how long a normal ankle sprain lasts for Saquon Barkley. Put the over-under on his return 4 weeks from now. I might take the over. Mike Evans with a good week. Mike Evans famously has never had a season under 1,000 yards receiving, and he's already almost 25% of the way there through 2 games. You better get the yards in now, though. You'll be much older at the end of the season, older than he is right now. Having just looked at the college stats of a few wide receiver prospects over the last few years, Devontae Smith's stats were nuts. He had 1,800 receiving yards in 13 games, 23 touchdowns. As good as his week 2 was, it doesn't even seem that good compared to that now. Or it's almost disappointing. Christian McCaffrey with a good week, sharing the load in no way with Elijah Mitchell, apparently. Starting to look like he might have been the right pick for first overall, even though Justin Jefferson is right behind him and has been very consistent. Welcome back, Deebo Samuel. After calling you out last week, Deebo had a great 2021, and it was kind of forgotten about in 2022. It's nice to see him on the board again. I have him on my Dynasty team, partially because of 2021, so I'm really excited to have him. Welcome back, Deebo. Raise your hand if you didn't think that Bijan Robinson was going to be splitting it with Tyler Algier for very long. Yeah, that Bijan Robinson is really good. Tyler Algier is good. He's not Bijan Robinson. Apparently, Josh Allen missed the memo that no quarterbacks were allowed to be good this week. Actually had a decent week, which means that he's probably back to being one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy again. Now time to see who lost you your week. I'm going to point out Miles Sanders here. Somehow Miles Sanders has an 84% started rate for Carolina. This seems high. I don't know if this reflects more on Miles Sanders or on Chuba Hubbard or Bryce Young or anyone else on the Panthers, but 84% for Miles Sanders seems pretty high. I went into 2 matchups Monday night where Miles Sanders scoring less than 3 points would have been very helpful. And I thought I had a chance. Although looking down the list, it might just be that there really are now other running backs that people really want to start. Unfortunately, that might be the case. There's a lot of running backs on the losing side this week. Surprisingly, Joshua Kelly is on the losing side. Maybe this will be one of those seasons where Joshua Kelly does better when he's the backup. I don't know. 2 for 2 on that so far. All right, pouring one out for Nick Chubb. That was probably the worst knee injury. Well, that's probably the worst injury we've seen in a bit. And it goes in a long list of injuries that you really, really should not Google. I'm not going to put them up on the screen here, but I might watch one because I can't stop thinking about it. All right, let's try to put this injury in perspective here. Nick Chubb's injury was pretty gruesome, but was it worse than Dak Prescott's ankle injury? I don't know. I think Nick Chubb's injury was worse, but Dax was very public. All right, now let's compare it to the injury that somehow got replayed. It's funny. They didn't replay the Nick Chubb injury on TV. Shows you how far we've come since the Willis McGahee injury in the national title game of 2002. I feel like they played that injury on SportsCenter like 3 times a night for the next month. Actually, for months while he was going through rehab.
Big shots, one on Winslow, and then this one. Oh, my goodness. Oh, Lord.
I actually think the McGahee one is, I don't know, maybe I'm desensitized to it because of how many times this was shown 20 years ago on ESPN. I don't know. I think the speed of it makes Nick Chubb's a little bit worse too. Well, we're going to stop there because a lot of the other comparable knee injuries were definitely career enders. So we don't need to get into those. Those are a little bit more sad. At least Willis McGahee came back. Dak Prescott came back. Alex Smith came back. Oh no, do I have to watch Alex Smith?
This is what happened to Alex Smith. We'll be back.
I think the Alex Smith one might have been worse partially because I know what happened inside the sock. All right, before I vomit on the camera, let's move on. AJ Brown, since the beginning of been tracked in his metric, he has a tendency to do this. He'll have some really bad weeks in there. He'll have great weeks. And hopefully you're starting him for the great weeks, at least. Don't bench A.J. Brown. Whatever you do not bench A.J. Brown. It was welcome back Calvin Ridley and welcome back Breece Hall in week 1. And it was goodbye to their fantasy positivity in week 2.
Goodbye, Scrambles. We'll miss you.
Rough week for Jaguars overall. ETN at only 5 points. Trevor Lawrence at only 9. Think Bigsby, not on here, also had 0. Just throw that one out there. Redoing the order a little bit this week. Let's get into the Junior Varsity All-Stars. These are the players who have performed the best that you probably had on your bench. Top of the list is the Pittsburgh defense. Now, Pittsburgh defense was not on my bench or my opponent's bench in one league. I played against the Pittsburgh defense. I actually went to bed thinking I won because I had a 99% chance of winning in this particular matchup. Check out the Fantasy Football Franchise Podcast if you want to hear more about that. Sure, that'll come up. 26 points for Pittsburgh here. They won you a lot of games, but almost no one started them. Almost no one. Clearly, some people did. Kyron Williams. I believe I had that one. It's too bad that Kyron Williams was only started in 8% of leagues. It was pretty clear after week 1 that he was outperforming Cam Akers. Only 8% started for a huge week there. Nico Collins is on the JV All-Stars this week. Brian Robinson is on the list at only 33% started. It's a little surprising given how bad Antonio Gibson was. It could be that maybe for 2023, more people than usual were expecting week 1 to be an aberration. I always thought Brian Robinson kind of runs a little bit too upright, but clearly he's been fine so far. DeAndre Swift. This really puts things in perspective. I don't recall Miles Sanders having a game like this in quite a while. DeAndre Swift might not be a great blocker, but he can run. He's shifty. Also, DeAndre Swift having a 30% started number on the Eagles, while Miles Sanders is 84% started on the Panthers, might indicate that we tend to prioritize backs that get volume more than backs that are on good teams, perhaps more than we should. Puka Nacua, up to 22% started. So he's probably going to get up to like 50% next week. Who knows? Maybe he'll do well. If he does well again, there might actually be some question about whether or not he needs somewhat of the role in the Rams offense that Cooper Kupp has. Who knows? Brandon Johnson, 0% started, 19.6 points. It sounds like they just grabbed someone out of the first row of the stadium in Denver and said, you need to play wide receiver. And apparently he got a lot more volume than Marvin Mims somehow. Marvin Mims, although performed well. That was the gist of week 2. Let's go over to the leaderboards, see how everyone's doing.
Why cheesing? Because it's fun to do.
First, we have the Cooper Kupp Golden Barrel. This is the first incarnation of the Cooper Kupp Golden Barrel list this year. This is a list of just the top Fantasy Games 1 scorers, not adjusted for draft position. It's named after Cooper Kupp because he won this particular award back in 2021. And the Dallas defense is running away with it. I didn't get a lot of visibility on my Reddit post week 1. Maybe it's because I posted at a strange time. Maybe because my title sucked. But I got one commenter. You tactic hater commented with a line that I wish I had come up with. The Dallas giveth and the Dallas taketh away. Well, Dallas is definitely taketh away from the Jets here and giveth to fantasy managers. And the reason why Dallas taketh away in the first, it's not just a double entendre with the team being a defensive team, but it's also because Dallas Goedert has been pretty bad. And I don't know why I didn't make that connection. I need to up my game. Dallas has been great for both weeks. Tyreek Hill had a great week 1. McCaffrey's been pretty good both weeks. And check out Justin Jefferson. Super consistent. 19 points each week. Upping your win chances up to about 66% if you had him instead of just a regular fantasy starter. That's the most efficient way to actually get your fantasy points, is that you have him consistently above average, because most teams score about the average. So if you score a little above average, you get a lot of value for those points compared to if you score a lot one week and a little another week, because once you get out to the tail ends of the distribution, your impact on your team's record isn't as great. In fact, I'm going to put a link up there that breaks down the fantasy games one metric in more detail and gets into normal distribution and things like that. So encourage you to check that out if this metric is still French. Time for the Brady Wedding Ring Least Valuable Player Leaderboard. Brady won this award last year. Kyle Pitts is on here. I'm not really surprised to see Kyle Pitts on here. I don't believe Kyle Pitts is ever going to be a low drafted tight end because of his talent level. He might not help your fantasy team, but his athletic potential, talent and potential means, after my whole diatribe at the beginning of this video, is going to make sure he's drafted above a lot of other tight ends that are not nearly as athletic as Kyle Pitts. Jahmyr Gibbs is on here. Hopefully Jahmyr Gibbs gets some more volume, or maybe this is another DeAndre Swift situation where we just have to wait for him to go to the Eagles or something like that. Dallas Goedert's on here, as I teased before. He taketh away from the fantasy team and giveth to your opponents for sure. Is it possible that Najee Harris just isn't that good anymore? Or is it to the Steelers? I don't understand this. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the least valuable player leaderboard, or at the top of the leaderboard, I have it at the bottom, but it's the winner so far. Joe Burrow, unable to undo week 1 fully. I'm not lighting the beacons yet for calling for aid as a Joe Burrow owner in my most expensive fantasy team, but I might soon. We'll see. 2 more leaderboards to get to this week. Next is the Plate of Jonathan Taylor Promise. So this is the leaderboard of Draft Capital adjusted fantasy games 1. But you'll have some kickers up here because no one's drafting kickers highly. They're still going to hang out a bit until they inevitably have their bad games to get rid of these kickers soon. Although Cameron Dicker can stay. I look forward to more Dicker the Kicker jokes. Would you rather a moody kicker or a kick in the dicker? I'm like 12 years old. The opposite of the return on investment leaderboard, that was just the return on investment leaderboard we're looking at, which is adjusted for draft capital, investment being draft picks. We have the disappearance of investment leaderboard. This is the players who've done the worst considering draft picks. So if you're doing poorly and you're drafted highly, you get knocked down even more. A lot of this looks like the least valuable player leaderboard with one notable change, Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is at the bottom of the list. So here's what's happened with Jamar Chase. If you took Jamar Chase, like I did, very highly in drafts, because I thought he was so talented, at his draft slot, you're expecting to get around 16.5 points per game from him. The first 2 weeks, he's gotten 6.6 and 5.6 points, and that's in a half PPR scoring system. So he's been around 10 points off of the expectation for your first round pick 2 weeks in a row now. That means that in week 1, your win percentage with Jamar Chase was about 30%. In week 2, your win percentage with Jamar Chase was 28%. Which means that you're expected to have about 0.58 wins so far in the season. So you're almost as likely to be winless as 1-1. Could be 2-0. And if you're a 2-0 with a Jamar Chase owner, let me know the next time you're going to Las Vegas, because I'll join you and we'll play craps together and it'll be awesome. Fantasy Games 1 lives over on byron-cobot.com. You can find a link to the blog in the description. If you want to support this for a $1 contribution, I will give you data. So check that out on a weekly post. You will get the start and sit and weekly rankings data that can be very hard to find or at least comb together after the fact. And I have it for back in 2021 and 2022 as well. So check that out. If you did draft Jamar Chase and you're 0-2, you and me both are going down in this fantasy football ship together. It's been a privilege and an honor. See you next week.
Come on now. Help me. Together now, Nick.
Right. That's it then. Goodbye, Ollie. Good luck.
Goodbye, Bolly.
Take a turn around the baby, load the bird down until the day.